Hello and welcome to Minding Kingston's podcast, where we talk about all things mental health with people who live or work in the borough. I'm Vicky Bourne and I work as the charity's Counselling and Wellbeing Manager. In this edition,
I can't tell you the feeling of seeing all these women in little groups, chatting to each other, laughing, sharing stories, was just, there's a real, when women get together and support each other, there is just this
buzz.
Yeah.
Doctor Francesca Cappelluto is a mother of three who's worked as a GP for the past 10 years. Having suffered from anxiety herself, Fran has always been aware of the importance of good mental health and is also a specialist in the menopause, a subject which has only very recently emerged from the shadows. Fran set up Menopause Mondays, a local group for women who struggle with the widely varying symptoms. But I started by asking her what exactly the menopause is.
So the menopause itself, the word is just a clinical definition of when periods have stopped for a year. And actually with the menopause, there's a few different stages that people will go through. So the first bit is called the perimenopause, which is basically when your hormones are really going up and down, and that's when most people will get their symptoms. And it can be sort of 10 years before your periods actually stop, that you start experiencing symptoms. So, it's a significant...
So you could be quite young at the time when that all starts,
yeah,
then, really.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of sort of diagnosing people, if they're over the age of 45, they don't even need any blood tests. If they've got the symptoms of the menopause, then we don't even need to do any blood tests. We can say, yes, we'll treat it as such. And I think the biggest thing in terms of the menopause is we hear the word a lot, but not everyone knows what the symptoms are.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of people also feel that if they're still having periods, that they can't be going through the menopause. But actually, most people will have most of their symptoms when they're still having their periods. And I think the other tricky thing with the menopause is that it's different for everyone.
So what are the main symptoms to look out for?
So even in terms of something straightforward as periods, they can be closer together, they can be further apart, they can be lighter, they can be heavier. So there's not really a way for people to know for definite, what is it that's happening. And I think, people always talk about the hot flushes and the night sweats, but not everyone gets those. So I think 25% of women don't get hot flushes and night sweats. So then people think, well, it can't be the menopause because I don't have those symptoms. But actually the sort of mental health side of it, which I think probably about 75%, 80% of women will get, the irritability, mood swings, brain... Anxiety, brain fog. I mean, I remember, so my mum had really bad mental health symptoms with her menopause. I think I must have been maybe 15 or 16 at the time. And she couldn't let me out of her sight because she was worried something was going to happen to me. And as a teenager, for me, I couldn't really understand why was she being so silly. Clearly nothing was going to happen to me. And I remember she couldn't go into supermarkets because the lights, because the supermarket was so big. I think so many decisions. She couldn't sort of think, well, what do we actually need?
So the whole sensory kind of overload as well comes into it.
And I think that people don't know enough about that side of it. I think we focus a lot on the physical symptoms. But a thing I hear women always say to me a lot is that I lost myself. I don't know who I am anymore. And I think the other...
Well, you become a rather different person, I think, as well, don't you?
Yeah, and I think the other difficulty is that because when menopause is happening in people's lives now, you may still have fairly young children. You may have elderly parents. You may be going through difficulties in your relationship. You may be looking at a promotion at work, sort of getting to the best part of your career, and suddenly your body decides, oh no, I can't do this anymore. And I think a little bit with sort of like COVID and lockdown, it's very easy to blame it on other things. So say, oh, well, it's because my child's going to secondary school and I'm really stressed about choosing the right place, or, you know, it's because I've got this new promotion at work and it's too much. So I think it's really easy to say, actually, it's other things and not to think about the menopause.
So what you're really saying is it can often coincide with a very busy phase of life. And I know for many women, they have teenagers as well who are going through all those hormonal changes and mood swings, etc. So, I mean, basically, it can be a very, very difficult time for people, can't it?
And I think that's why, as well, for me, the biggest thing is getting the information out there, because I think, I'm sure you'll have seen, there were a couple of stories in the national news recently. There were two husbands talking about having lost their wives to suicide.
Yes. I heard a very moving interview recently. Yes, I was going to ask you about that. He had no idea, and just in retrospect said that probably his wife, whom they'd put it down to COVID, I think, or certainly some other major thing that had been going on in their lives, and then only in retrospect did he realise that her overwhelming anxiety, I mean, she sounded like she'd really changed personality from being a very outgoing and confident and positive woman to someone that just could hardly leave the house at all. You know, and he said if only he'd known more about it, you know, the support that could have been put in place.
Well, I think the thing that I found shocking was that she'd seen so many healthcare professionals and not a single person mentioned the menopause. And I think, you know, she was slightly younger. I think she was 42. And I think that's why, for me, I think it's important for people to know earlier rather than later, because then at least you can try and understand it. And I think not just women, but also men. Because
absolutely.
Sometimes, I mean, I'd say for myself, I've been through anxiety and burnout at work, and sometimes it's actually only someone looking at you from the outside that can say, well, actually, you're not behaving the way that you normally do. And I think that getting men as part of the conversation as well is really important, because your husband probably knows you best, sees you on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is important as well, not to exclude them from the conversation, which I think is easy to do.
Yeah, and really it's like with so many things, it's a matter of education, isn't it? Getting it into schools, talking about it, just the same as you talk about periods starting or any other kind of physiological changes that, you know, most people can expect to go through. And, you know, it's a taboo, isn't it? It's about getting old and nobody wants to talk about this. And women are often seen, well, they were in the previous times, as surplus to excess, no longer needed in society. But medicine really needs to catch up with this, doesn't it? And, you know, become informed and have that conversation.
Women's health is really, it's sort of the Cinderella of medicine. It really doesn't get the... I don't know why, but it does feel, you know, periods, I see a lot of young girls that they'll come and say, oh, well, I have to be off school for 2 days because it's so painful. And you think, that's not okay. You don't have to put up with that. And I think, like you said, I think as women, we feel like we have to hide the things that make us female because it's somehow seen as a weakness. At one of
a bit messy.
Yeah, at one of my menopause groups, a lady came up to me and she was saying that she was a lawyer, or she worked in a law firm, and she said, I just can't let the men see me cry, because if they see me cry, that's it, I've lost all respect. And I think about, you know, for men, it's okay for them to show aggression or to get angry, and that's not seen necessarily as a bad thing. But women show their emotions in a different way. We are more likely to cry, but that's seen in a negative way, rather than being, it's a passionate thing. You cry because you care about how you come across, or what's happening. And I think it really is changing those things.
Stereotypes. Yeah, and people's reactions to them. So you just mentioned the groups that you run. Tell us a bit about that, Francesca.
So basically, I was trying to get a clinic in the NHS for the menopause, but money is tight, obviously, with COVID, and as I said before, women's health doesn't always get the attention that it needs. And basically, I just wanted a place that women could get together and talk about the menopause. A little bit, I kind of see it a bit sort of like an NCT type thing, that, when you have your first baby, you've got this group of women that you can share, breastfeeding's going really terribly, I can't get the child to sleep, and share your tips and things that have worked for you.
And things that have gone wrong, which I think can make it such a huge difference to the whole experience, can't it?
Huge difference. And, being able to admit that things are not going very well for you at the moment. And basically it... So I set up this group. It's in a local sort of community hall. It's free for people to attend. I do a little 20-minute chat about something related to the menopause. So the first session I did about what the symptoms are. And then get everyone together into small groups to chat. And I have to say I was a bit nervous, because the first time I thought I will probably get about 10 people, and 40 women turned up.
Oh my gosh, how did you advertise, Francesca?
Just on Facebook.
That says it all, doesn't it?
Well, that's the, and in the local, so the local cafe, which is basically my office, is they let me put up a poster. And yes,
because you're a GP and you have kids, you have a very busy life yourself, don't you? So this is on top of all that.
But it just, I can't tell you, the feeling of seeing all these women in little groups, chatting to each other, laughing, sharing stories, was just, there's a real, when women get together and support each other, there is just this
buzz.
Yeah.
And it really positive.
And it was just, I was saying this to my husband, as a GP, I became a GP because I want to help people. That's why I did it. You can't really help that many people as a single GP. You can try, but ultimately, it's quite a challenge. But something like this, I really feel like I can make a difference. And we've done, so the third one is tonight, but the last two we've had 40 women out, and different women, so not the same 40 for the first two. And so many people have come up and just said thank you so much for doing this, because it is just not feeling alone. And I think with anything like that, no one wants to admit that they can't do something. And I think particularly women, we're sort of, you feel like you just carry on with things, don't you? Just put your head down.
Of course.
Especially when you've got kids and you've got busy life, you just put your head down.
And everybody else seems to be coping, so you might as well pretend that you're coping as well.
And I think with, Instagram, Facebook, everyone shares their best moment.
Of course. We all live those lives. Yeah.
So no, it's quite exciting.
Very exciting. And is this, obviously, you're doing this in that particular area. Are you aware that other groups are going on in different areas of the country?
So I think the menopause is definitely getting a bit of kind of, there's definitely a movement to try and get this out there. So I know there is something
we need more.
Well, there is something called the Menopause Cafe, which is in different areas. I think it originally was set up in Edinburgh. But that's more of a support, more of getting women together to support each other. Whereas I wanted it to be a little bit more of an information giving, because I think that's how you empower women to make the choices, because
Absolutely. I mean, you've done, you've dealt with some myths already in our conversation. One about, your periods going on while you're actually in the menopause. I wonder how widely known that is. And the other one about, that you don't actually need a blood test or go through any kind of formal diagnostic scenario, which might put a lot of people coming off going to their GPs. So,
and I think as well that, being a GP is hard. There are a lot of things that you have to know a lot about. But the menopause is such a basic thing that a lot of GPs don't know about. And it's not really our fault. I think at medical school we had 1 day on the menopause. This is a system problem. This is something that needs to change from medical school.
Training problem. Yeah, absolutely.
And I sort of came to it by accident in that I thought I need to do a bit of training on something. And the Dr. Louise Newson, my menopause doctor, she had her free course. I think initially it was one healthcare professional in each surgery could do it for free. And I thought, oh, well, why not? And it was just eye-opening. The number of symptoms, how much it affects women, women having to take time. I think 1 in 4 women have to take time off work because of it.
And it's gradually being more recognised in some more progressive workspaces, isn't it?
Well, this is, and I have to say, I'm not sure that the NHS is one of those progressive workplaces. And I think that's probably a good place to start, because how can you help people if you are a menopausal woman working in the NHS and not being supported? And
of course the vast majority of people that working in the NHS are women, aren't they?
Yeah.
And very often women of menopausal age as well. So it's it's a feminist issue, it's a societal issue, and it really needs to be recognised.
Well, this is the thing. I think sometimes we're quite short-sighted. That if you deal with this issue now, you can prevent lots of things in the future. So, they're always talking about there's not enough women in high positions. Well, that's because no one's helped them through the menopause, so they haven't been able to do, that role. And I think...
And a lot of women leave work, don't they, at this time? They are, I think, currently, and then they never come back. So that's a huge loss.
Well, I think as well, I was talking to someone about this the other day, that men and women are different and we bring different things to different roles. And I think that we were actually talking about Prime Minister. And I was saying that I think, Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher tried not to be female. They tried to be male. Whereas someone like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, she uses her female qualities to be an excellent leader.
Absolutely.
And I think it is that thing, as you said, we're losing this real resource of these women with different skills and experience. And it's also, the thing I find frustrating, it's a fairly easy thing to fix. It's identifying it is the first thing. And then obviously HRT is an option for the majority of women. What we know now is that the benefits of HRT outweigh the risks in the majority of women. So
I was going to ask you actually about treatments and HRT and also alternative treatments, really, and how things have changed and improved over the years.
HRT is not the sort of bad guy that it was.
Yes, a lot of people feel very fearful of HRT, don't they?
Well, this is the thing, and I think the important thing to say about HRT is that it's an individualised approach. So every single person has a different set of baseline risks depending on their own history, their family history. And actually, there's very few people who absolutely cannot take HRT. But what it needs is a sit down with someone who knows what they're talking about, going through your risks and talking through what's best for you.
Which is quite a long consultation by the sound of it.
This is the issue again in the NHS. So in my last practice, I actually set up sort of group consultations, because the information giving part is the same for everyone. So the basics are the same for everyone. And then you need the one-to-one. But what do we have, 10 minutes in? It's just not enough time, not to do it properly.
Absolutely.
And it's not, as we were saying, it's not just the physical symptoms. It's everything that goes with it. And as I said, HRT does work for a lot of women, and it can be life-changing for some women. But there are other things, CBT, so talking therapies, exercise, diet, all the things that we should be doing for other things, you know. And I think another really important thing as well, which we don't talk about, is bone health. So
yep, absolutely. Osteoporosis is something that can really become an issue, can't it?
And heart disease risk as well. So we know that
HRT, I gather, can protect against in some instances.
This is what the latest evidence is showing, that HRT potentially improves your cardiovascular risk profile. And I mean, again, look at the NHS just fights its fires. If we could stop women from having hip fractures or from having heart attacks, or, you know, there's a small evidence that it potentially protects against dementia. It's still kind of in the early stages, but if we could do something to prevent all those things, it would just,
revolutionise women's health, and obviously save money and lots of other things as well, save families and, save people going through dreadful, terrible times that they don't need to be going through.
I think that's the frustrating thing. It's that thing that it can be made better for people. You don't have to suffer through it. I think there's a lot of sometimes, oh, well, it's a natural process, so just suck it up and get on with it. But, you know,
you wouldn't do that if it was a physical... well, it is a physical problem, but you know what I mean. You wouldn't do that if you'd pulled a ligament.
It's a bit like childbirth, when they're like, well, you know, try and go through it without pain relief. But why? if you can make it better, why should we have to sort of grin and bear it? And I think it is about that, being able to be the best you, and being able to give to society as you want to, and not feeling that you can't because your hormones have decided to go a bit
haywire. Yeah. And looking back, you know, I can remember reading books by Charlotte Bronte and other Victorian writers and writers of that era. And, you know, women sort of just took to their beds in some of these novels and never got up again. And looking back, obviously, that was the menopause, which in those days no one really knew anything about or recognised. But ostensibly, their lives were over, weren't they? And
Mrs. Bennet always talks about her nerves.
Of course, a classic case. Yeah. And very much coinciding with her daughters, getting out and about and being feisty.
I think this is the thing as well, that where we are in our lives when the menopause hits is very different now. So in some ways it's a new thing, because we're trying to do everything as well as that. And I think a lot more needs to be done to help women help themselves. I think that's the, with anything medical, the best way for things to be resolved is for the patient to know what the options are and for them to make the decision.
Yeah, informed choice.
Yeah, there's no point in us telling people what to do, because they won't do it.
And obviously some people in that are going to be very resistant to taking HRT or not want to go down that route for multiple different reasons. And are there alternatives? Are there good alternatives on the market?
So there are. So you can take antidepressants for hot flushes and night sweats.
Really?
They're not as good as
they
HRT.
work on a physiological
Yes. So they don't
basis,
work
do they?
for depression and anxiety caused by the menopause, but they can work for the physical symptoms. I'm not entirely sure how they work, but they can help. I think diet has shown to be a big factor. Things like cutting out caffeine and alcohol. And I think it's a difficult one, because I always say to people, well, everything in moderation is okay, because if you cut everything out that makes you feel happy, then what have you got?
Fed up, yeah.
But there's a lot of evidence that cutting out alcohol does make a big difference to things like hot flushes.
And sleep, of course, I suppose.
Sleep is a huge, again, someone who's suffered with anxiety. If I've had a bad night's sleep, I know that the next day is going to be much worse.
Yes. And it's that kind of life, isn't it, where you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you have those recurrent thoughts. That's very much coincided with menopausal symptoms, I think, isn't it?
And there's something called Sleepio, which is a CBT for insomnia, which is available on the NHS. It's a website, and that's actually shown to be very effective to help with sleep issues. So I think it's as effective as sleeping tablets, but the effect lasts longer than sleeping tablets.
Right. That sounds amazing. We'll be putting up all these links, after the podcast. So, yeah, that's another really useful tip.
And I do think there is a big benefit of just sharing experiences. I think, I see it at work, that when someone comes to me and tells me that they're depressed or they're drinking too much alcohol, or the feeling of just having given that over to someone else, just unburdening yourself, telling someone else, really makes a difference. And I think that's probably the biggest message to get out, is that talk to someone.
You're not alone. It's a common, normal experience. There are things that can help. It shouldn't be a taboo. We're really fighting for it not to be so much of a taboo. And the more we talk and discuss these things, just the easier they become, don't they? And it's, as you say, such a relief, isn't it, to find other people going through similar things. I was talking there to Fran Cappelluto. And before we go, do please have a listen to the other chats in this series. You can find them wherever you usually download your podcasts. And we'd be really grateful if you subscribed and left a review too. It all helps to spread the word. I'm Vicky Bourne of Mind in Kingston. And until the next time, take good care.